let's begin. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick video on basically taking our example code that we had in Seminar 9, which just gives us a global board made up of integers, a function to draw it, and then discusses how we basically do the shift operations to the left. That's something you get to then work out for yourself in terms of how to implement that for other directions, but everything that you need as a basis is in that seminar. What we're going to look at in this video is turning this base code into a class such that you're sort of on track for adding another class and meeting the required spec for the assignment. So to begin this, we're going to need to create new files. If you haven't already, board CPP and board.h. And as we'll probably remember, we can define a class with a name, the class keyword, the name of the class, which should be capitalized by convention, curly braces, don't forget to terminate them, and then we'll add the keywords public and private. Ready to add members to the class. So what we'll do is we'll shift parts of this code into the class, and then we'll have to look at how can we use it in the class back in our main function. But in essence, we're going to move anything related to the board into the board class. So to begin with, this object can be moved into the board class. We'll make that a private member. So now this class, this board class, contains a 2D array of integers. What we'll do is we'll rename that to just board with a lowercase. You might decide to call that something like board vals or something similar to note that they're the values that represent the board. But you might even later change those from integers to some other class, like a tile class, for example. But given that, we can jump back to our main, and we can actually move the functions into the class as well. So if we begin with these three functions, the way I like to do this is I'll paste them into the header, and I'll also paste them into the CPP. And then in the header file, I'll just delete the curly braces and replace them with a semicolon, which turns this into a function declaration, which is all that we want in the header file. A bit of formatting to tidy it up. We got our function declarations for merging left, or shifting left, whatever you want to term it. So we don't have implementations for these yet. There's something that you're going to have to work on, but we do have an implementation for draw board, so let's move that one as well. Likewise, this can go into the board.cpp. And also into board.h. But we can remove, similarly, the implementation in the header. Okay, so it's a little bit of setup we forgot to do in our class. We're going to need to make sure we use the pragma once preprocessor directive to say we only want to include the board class up to maximum of one time. And board CPP is going to need access to the things in the board class declarations. So let's include board. And if we exclude this code, we might want to check whether we can compile or not at this point. Looks good. So the compiler seems to be basically happy with what's going on so far. But we can already notice that we're not providing an actual definition for the draw board that is contained inside the board class. So we need to remember to put the scope operator in place to ensure that we are defining our functions correctly. And actually, now that we have board as a private member of the board class, we don't need to pass board around anymore, because all these functions have access. As member functions of the board class, they have access to our internal board object. So we can actually remove the arguments here. And in my case, I'm going to have to change this to board. And you may have to do the same if you've already implemented this, that although this argument does suggest that the name would be board, if you've changed that, you'll have to change your code as appropriate. Compiler still seems happy. So what happens when we want to try and make use of board? Going to need to include it. We might need to move our constants into the board class as well, to make them accessible here. Oops. And because these will stay consistent inside the class, in any instance of the class, they're constants, so we can make these static values as well, such that they only ever refer to fixed values, rather than every class having its own sort of value to represent the tile width or height, that is. And then in main, if we want to use any of these functions or operations on the board now, we're going to need to first create our instance of board. Then we can use these functions by calling the functions on board. So we have our board instance, the object of our board, and we can call functions from that. And we no longer pass a parameter to these functions. So we're having symbols not found for what we got for draw board and for shift left, which is both the functions we're calling. This is likely because I haven't added board.cpp to my sources. So there we go. Don't want size t's, let's use integers. And here we go. So if we run our program, get the expected output, which is in this case draw board. Shift left does nothing in my example here. Shift left is just a bit of an overview function. That's a function that's yet to be defined, at least, that you're going to have to go on and do. And then we draw the board again. So now we've wrapped up our board, sort of our notion of the board, into a class, and we can make use of that. Ultimately, in your program, you'll quite likely do something like this, because you're going to be using the loop function to manage the flow of your game. You'll have your paint callback here, and then you'll also have a key press callback. You take a key press, and I imagine in this you will want to do something like checking for left arrow, and then if you get that left arrow, on every left arrow press, that is, you'll do a shift left. And then you'll continue to do this for all arrow directions. Where you define your own extra functions for shift right. Okay, I'm going to wrap that one up here, and we'll do another little video on graphics very soon. Thank you.